weak with no consequences. Let's just face it, right? As an administrator, I am already weak with no consequences. By default, I got a name tag that says Ruff Lott III, assistant principal, right? And so by default, the power that I was given, right? They gave me the biggest gun with the smallest bullets. ISS, suspension, right? Off-campus suspension. They gave me DAEP, and then JJEP if it got that bad, right? Those were the only thing I had. Maybe it's a little lunch detention here and there, that's if I could pull that off. That's all that I had. So every time that something happened, I had to make a decision, right? I was either going to ISS somebody, I was going to suspend them, or I was going to send them to DAP, I was going to make a discretionary placement, that sort of thing. I had the biggest gun, I had all the power, but I had the smallest bullets, and I wasn't affecting change. See, let's face it, right? Let's face it. I must have not gotten into the line. When I got out of graduate school, I must not got in the right line. See, because when I graduated, they didn't give me one of these, right? They didn't tell me that when I showed up to a campus that I was going to have all the power, I was going to get the fairy dust, right, to make this happen. See, they didn't give me a magic wand. See, they didn't say, Yolanda, you are no longer going to be tardy, right? They didn't do that, did they? They didn't say, Jennifer, you will not be disrespectful to the teacher. See, I wish I had one of these, right? I wish I had one of these that I could just walk around the campus, right? And I could be like, Sarisa, right? You're going to respect everybody who walks next. See, you get where I'm getting with this, right? I wasn't given this tool. I was given the biggest gun with the smallest bullets, and I was like, they were like, go change the world. You see how I was set up to fail? You see how I could feel anxious about supporting my students, supporting the teachers? You follow me? And to be honest with you, teachers don't really care, right? They don't care if you use the magic dust, or they don't care if you use the backside of this, right? They just want something done. Right? And I always joke, and I say, I always joke and I say this, right? That's funny, right? And Sarisa and I were talking about this earlier because she said that sometimes, the kids just come back to class. Well, that's true because I don't know what to do either. And together we need to figure this out. But isn't that true, right? I sent them back to class with the Starburst. I did what I could. I talked to them. I tried to figure it out. But at the end of the day, can I change that kid for you? No. So as an administrator, you are now disappointed. And to be honest with you, I could have never, right? It's like the three bears, right? It's either too hot, it's either too cold, or it's just right. And so if it's just right, that gives me a 33% chance of getting things correct, of making you happy. So therefore, I'm stuck out. I'm just gonna hope that it works out. You see what I'm saying? And so when we look at those things, right? We say, well, the naysayers, right? Oh, this is just another gimmick. This is just something else that's coming down the pipe. Blase, right? Let's just be honest. It's not another gimmick. This is a tool. It's a process. It's something else that we're going to arm, notice my words, we're going to arm the educator with so that they can build better relationships with their students in the classrooms so that we are dealing with things on the front end rather than having to proactively, right? Rather than dealing with things on the back end reactively. You follow me? And so if we can start getting to a point where we can build community and build culture using restorative practices, using the circle process, then it's a good chance, and it's what we saw, that we weren't dealing with as many things on the back end simply because we were attacking them from the front end. We were talking about things. We were having students build relationships with one another so that they were less likely to have physical altercations with each other. This is what we did, and this is how we started to build community on our campus. And so when we talk about restorative justice versus restorative discipline, I'm going to be honest with you guys. Since stepping out of the classroom and starting to work with consulting, I've gotten away from calling it restorative discipline. And if you have some of this going on your campuses or you know something about it, we are really looking at changing the grammatics to it, right? It's not discipline. Right? Because at the end of the day, well, in its true essence it is, but see, at the end of the day, when you think discipline, you think consequences, right? You think something has to happen. But when you look at the Webster definition of dictionary, of discipline in the dictionary, it means to train. Right? And so when we called it restorative discipline, we were saying, okay, we're gonna be teaching our kids. So when teachers were sending me a referral, it's a discipline referral, I'd be like, yeah, okay, thank you for sending me that training referral. Because now we had to figure out how to train this student. See, they don't want that, right? They want the thump. They want that kid to come back to class limping. And all those kinds of things, right? They just need something done. And so we went away from calling it restorative justice because it has a negative connotation, right? We didn't want to bring the legal system into the schools. And so in the restorative justice world, they call it the victim, the offender, and they call it the community where those things happen. In schools, right, under restorative practices, we call it the person who was harmed, right? The person who caused the harm, And then the community is where the harm was caused, right? So that could be your classroom, bathroom, whatever took place, okay? And so under the 3-tier implementation, right, because this is what we do in education, right? We say 3 tiers: community building, prevention, intervention, and at the top tier is pretty much your intervention, right? And so when we talk about that in terms of relationships, at the bottom, community building, we're talking about reforming relationships, repairing relationships, and rebuilding relationships at the top. And so the Department of Education, they put a statement out, and this is one of the graphics that they had. And they said, if you implement restorative practices on campuses with any kind of fidelity, right, these are some of the things that you can, these are some of the positive outcomes that you can see. And I'm not going to insult your intelligence. I'll let you read through those and I'll move on. But these are some of the things that you should start to see happen. Now, it's not going to be day 1, day 2. It's going to take some time. It's going to take some work. It's going to take some mindset shift. But if you do those things with fidelity, these are some of the things, positive things or positive outcomes that could happen. And so traditional versus restorative practices. See, as an administrator, these were the things that I was talking about, right? What rule was broken? Who broke it? Who should be the punishment? That's all I did all day. I used to get 30, 40 referrals a day, and that's all I did was, okay, who did it? Who broke it? What's the punishment going to be? And I sent them out. Process, send them out. Process, send them out. I never took time any longer to find out what the root of the problem was that was happening with my students. And see, and on the other side here, see, restorative discipline asks simple questions like, what happened? What were you thinking at the time, right? And what should be done to make those things right? And so, quick story, you know, in 6th grade, we had some boys, okay? We had some boys. Now, I don't know about you in the campuses that you work with, but on my campus, 6th grade boys, they run. They come on campus, and they just take off running, right? And you look and they're like, woo, right? And this is what they do. Okay, and you know, in retrospect, right, having think about it, having been in elementary school for a little bit, right, elementary school teachers, they really teach them the expectations, right? It's almost cult-like. Like if you walk into an elementary school campus, right, and you walk down the hallway, you're going to see the kids, right? They're going to be in line. They're going to be walking, right? Some of them are going to have their bubbles, right? They go to lunch, right, and they sit down one after another, right? This is what they do. But see, somebody is teaching those students those expectations, and it works. You follow me? But see, when they get to middle school, right, now there's 1,000 kids. Now I just give them a schedule, and I'm like, find your class. And they're like, okay, ooh. And then they do something, and then we get upset, but we didn't teach them the proper thing to do. And so then it's like, well, I'm mad at you because you should already know what's in that sort of situation. You follow me? And so I say, I was going back to my story, right? So we had this group of boys, right? It was 4 boys. And so like 6th graders do, they were running around, they were playing around, and they were doing what they did. And he turned and boom, he hit a locker. Now you can understand, right? Middle locker, soft forehead. You can imagine what that did, right? Split him open. Now when you get cut in the head, what happens? It bleeds everywhere. So you can imagine this kid coming down our hallway bleeding everywhere. Right in the middle of the passing period, right? So there's 250, 300, 400 kids in that particular part of the building, the hallway or whatever, and they're like, oh my God, and they're running too. Right? So as an administrator, you're like, oh my God, what is happening, right? Did somebody get stabbed? Is there a gang fight? What's going on? And you're just kind of like in limbo. You don't really know what to do. Okay, and you're trying to get to the kids, but there's blood everywhere. People are falling in it. Stuff is being broken, backpacks and things. And so you just have this mass chaotic scene. And so when it's all said and done, and you bring the kids in, and you talk to them, and you ask them what happened, and they're like, I don't know. We were just playing around. So it wasn't a fight. It wasn't a gang fight. Nobody had a knife. It was, right? I got teachers that are texting, and they're like, should we go into lockdown? What's happening? You know what I mean? And so you ask those kids what happened. And so they started to tell us what happened. And so then you ask them the next question, right? Who was affected by what happened? And they're like, I'm 12 years old. I'm 11 years old. I don't really know who was affected. I mean, RJ was affected, right? He's bleeding all over the place, right? RJ's affected. I don't really know. And we're like, no. Like, you really have to think about it. We're like, who was affected by what happened? And they're like, well, RJ. I said, so who's going to clean all this stuff up? Oh, the custodian. And so they started listing all the people who were affected, right? The other kids that were in the hallway. And then while we're talking to them, right, we get a call from the nurse that says that 2 girls, right, have kind of been injured. One fell down, hurt a knee, and the other one broke a backpack. One of those satchel kind of purse things, binder. And so they're like, so those girls were affected. So the kids had to process through what happened. You see what I'm saying? And so they came up with a way to make it right. to make it right to the entire staff. See, it was easy on this side, right, to say, oh, that's easy, right? Horseplay, potential school-wide disruption, right? That's a discretionary placement, 15 days. I could get rid of y'all for some time. See, this is what this says to do over here. But see, when we start talking over here, now the kids are processing what took place. Yes, it was horseplay and all those kinds of things, but they had to figure out that they really harmed and affected some people by their knocking off. And so what they ended up agreeing to do, and I'm just shortening the story a little bit, what they ended up agreeing to do is they ended up to figure out how to fix the backpack, right? Did some little reparations, they put some money together, and they handled that situation. But then they were like, and then we were like, so what are you gonna do with the 300 people who were in the hallway who witnessed all of this? Because they went home tonight, right? And they told their parents that there was a knife at school, somebody got stabbed, somebody was hit, right? And here we are, school trying to change our culture, and look what you guys are doing, right? And so they're like, well, I guess we're gonna have to talk to them. I guess you are. And so imagine this, 4 boys on top of a stage with 300 kids in the cafeteria and them explaining what took place. See, that was a lifelong lesson for those kids. And not only that, they gave the students, student body, right, permission to hold themselves accountable if they saw them running again in the hallway. And so you can imagine that later on, what the 6th grade boys do, they still do that even though this took place. Remember, it's not a silver bullet, it's not a quick fix, they're still going to run. And so they were like, hey, aren't you one of those kids that said that you were going to be not running in the hallway anymore? And just like, dang. And then they come over here and they do, because that's what kids do, right? And they're like, hey, what, aren't you one of those kids? And so you talk about meaningful accountability. See, I didn't need to send them to alternative school to get meaningful accountability to those schools. Were they perfect? No, right? But did I get them a point across to them that by your actions, you have created this whole mass chaos, and now we have to figure out how to fix it. And so that's a quick story to kind of illustrate those points. And so there's 3 basic goals of restorative practices. Accountability, and we talked about that a second ago. Community safety, right? And this one I like the most is skill development. See, our kids, especially millennial learners, and it's funny that I say that because I feel like I'm a millennial learner, but maybe not. Millennial learners, right, they don't have the interpersonal skills. They're on the phone. They text message. They don't know how to talk. They don't know how to say sorry. They don't have these skills. They don't know how to have conversations and personal conversations. They don't know how to do that. And so Jim Walsh, who's one of the leading attorneys in the state of Texas as far as schools is concerned, he said that millennial learners must have these skills. And through restorative practices, we're showing kids how to be empathetic. We're showing kids how to work through their issues. We're arming them, notice my words, we're arming them with the skills, right, to cope and not lash out when they're upset. We're giving them those tools. We're teaching them through experience. We're teaching them through the circle platform on how to do these things. And so there's a paradigm shift, right? Just like I said, violation of rules to violation of relationships. See, you're more likely to do something for somebody, right, if you have a relationship with them. Think about it. Everybody in here has a boss, right? The boss, who you have a good relationship with, right, you're more prone to go a little above and beyond. But if you don't have that relationship with your boss, and I've worked with some people like that, you do the bare minimum, and you look at that person because you don't trust them. And so we go from violation of rules to violations of relationships, troubled students to a whole school approach. And that's what I love about this process, not program. See, the process is for every student on the campus. It's not just for those troubled kids, right? We always say in education, we spend 90% of our time with 10% of our students. But this is for everybody. See, there's no program out there that puts a talking piece in every child's hand, right? Even that kid who comes to school every day, who's a straight A student, and so forth and so on, that model kid who doesn't cause anybody any problems, deep down somewhere, they may be dealing with something. They may be dealing with something that they have to come to school and they have to fake it. But we would never know that because as the teachers, we don't focus on that student. We focus on the ones who are tearing it up. Let's just be real. That student does not have a voice on our campus, but a campus who implements restorative practices with some sort of fidelity allows that to flourish. Punishment to accountability, ISS for repairing the harm, right? And so I can still put a kid in ISS, and don't get me wrong, like I'll put a kid in ISS. It's easy. It's easy to do, but see, now I put kids in ISS with a motive, put an ISS with a reason. So I'm going to give them an assignment. I'm going to give them something to do that's outside the box, right? That's not the traditional sit there, shut up, be in a cubicle, and just do your time. I'm going to give them something to do. And case in point, right? I had a kid who was tearing up the classroom. He was cussing. He was doing all these kinds of things. He was using foul language. He became my PPC, right? My profanity prevention coordinator. See what I'm saying? And so he was like, well, what is that, Mr. Lott? I was like, I don't know. You're the first of its kind. You tell me. Right? And so he had to come up with some kind of PowerPoint. He had to come up with a presentation, see? And so when another student came and was using the same kind of language, I called him my coordinator to go figure that out. You see what I'm saying? So he had an assignment in ISS, and so just quick examples about doing things just a little different, right? Changing the mindset. And we talked a little about earlier about teaching appropriate behavior versus expecting appropriate behavior, right? I can't expect what I don't teach, all right? And so through this process, we were allowed to do that. And so why restorative, okay? And this is the key piece. So I've taken you through all those things. I've showed you the definitions. I kind of give you an overview of what it looks like. And so, but why, right? And I like that right there. It says because exclusion obviously doesn't work. I told you earlier, 1,149 instances of suspension on the campus. If we were excluding that many kids and exclusion was working, right, then like I said, you would argue that we would have the best behaved campus on the planet. Because those kids would go home for their 3 days and they'd come back and they'd be changed, right? They'd be baptized, right? They'd be baptized, they'd come back, they'd be happy, and everything would work out, right? Take your 3 days, go home, reflect, think about it, come back, and you're gonna be a model kid. But let's just face it, right? Traditional kids, from traditional values, those traditional consequences will work. But think about who it is that we work with. It's a good chance that they're not coming from traditional homes, they're not coming from traditional values, they're not coming from homes with traditional parents, right? And so we expect them to kind of mold themselves in this box, and that's not who they are. But until we figure out who they are, then we can start exploring who they can become, right? Key piece. And so exclusion in its kind of, in its basis or foundation is born out of zero tolerance, okay? And, you know, think about this. Back before zero tolerance, right, you had the Board of Education, right? And I know somebody in here I remember the lady, she used to walk around with that Board of Education. I was a young kid, but I remember she came, I piped up because I wasn't gonna get hit with that Board of Education, right? And so the legislature came and said, you know what? Corporal punishment, Board of Education, we can't do that anymore. So the teachers freaked out, right? They were like, what are we gonna do now? We can't hit them? We can't hit the kids anymore? Like, what are we gonna do? Like, we actually have to try to work with them? They were like, no, we'll just start ticketing them, right? You act up in class, here's your $250 fine, take it to your parents, go to the JP and figure it out. Thinking that was gonna help, but you know what? We must have done that so many times that the justice system said you are over flooding the system with ticketing. And so they were like, you can no longer ticket a kid that's younger than 12 years old or whatever the law says now. So they were like, okay, so then what are we gonna do? Then Columbine happened, right? And zero tolerance was born. And I will say this, zero tolerance at its inception, right? After doing a little research, zero tolerance at its inception is designed to do exactly what zero tolerance was supposed to do, right? Zero tolerance, the definition just says that if something happens, there must be a consequence. But we took that and convoluted it, right? We started saying, well, if there's a fight, you have to go home for 3 days. If there's this has to happen. If there's this is what has to happen. We started writing our student code of conduct. We started writing our district code of conduct with those parameters. See what I'm saying? See, zero tolerance works just fine in restorative practices because in restorative practices, you're gonna give a consequence. You're gonna give a consequence of meaningful accountability. There's a consequence. It just looks different. And so zero tolerance set us up to fail because they said that schools had to do this. And I'm not blaming the schools. Schools did what the schools were supposed to do. And they handled the situation they thought was best. I'm just saying that we have to start shifting our mindset and what we're looking at. And so in 2000, I think it was 14, Arne Duncan sent this from the Federal Education, the Department of Fed Ed, right? And he said that due to disproportionalities in what's taking place, right, the federal government is recommending that schools start adopting some sort of restorative practices. Because what he recognizes is that the school to prison pipeline is a real thing. It's a real thing. The school is really setting our kids up for failure and putting them in some positions to where they end up in the school to prison pipeline. Think about that for a second. So I'm gonna show you some data, and this is true data, right? And what I like about data is emotionless, right? And see, data doesn't always solve the problem for us. What data does is it provides us a platform to ask more questions. And so this is a study that was conducted by Edward J. Smith and Sean Harper. And what they did is they looked at suspension rates from the entire United States, specifically the 13 southern states, including us here in Texas, right? And so what they concluded was that in 55% of all black suspensions occurred in those 13 states, right? 84 school districts across the South, 100% of the students that were suspended from school were African-American students.